If you broke into my house in the middle of the night, shook me awake in my bed, looked me in the eyes and said, "Hey, what makes a good roguelike?" I would probably look back in your eyes and ask how you got in my house. With the genre being as saturated as it is, making a good roguelike these days is kind of tough. You need build variety, satisfying gameplay, engaging battles, and enough content to make people come back again and again and again and again and again. Though this sounds easy and relatively self-explanatory, it's pretty hard for roguelikes to fully capture my gaze, to make me excited for a release date so that I can shout at my friends to download it and hear what they think. This is one of those games. Sworn is an upcoming roguelike by Windwalk Games that surprised me at every single turn. From the fun build synergies, the expansive skill trees, the unique character roster, and the fact that it is fucking co-op, this game is 100% going into my rotation when it finally releases in a few weeks. I want to give a massive shout out to Sworn for letting me play this game early and for sponsoring today's video. You guys are awesome. Now please sit down and let me tell you about yet another roguelike that has stolen my life. Sworn is a top-down action roguelike that I can only describe as Hades with multiple characters, a much larger roster, and full-scale co-op. It's fast, it's weighty, and though I wasn't able to try multiplayer in the hours I spent playing the early build, I've had a wonderful time coming up with synergies and trying out separate characters. The loadout process in this game alone allows you to select a playstyle that matches your vibe. For starters, there are 4 characters in this game, which doesn't sound like much at all, but every single character has 4 unique weapons that completely alter their playstyle and approach. The Vigilante, for example, is a relatively fast swordsman with a spinning heavy attack he can weave within his combos. However, if you find out the playstyle isn't really working for you, he can choose to use the bow instead, turning this character into a much more reserved long-range sniper. The Rook has a much slower and more calculated playstyle, but since every character has their own unique weapon set, instead of giving the Rook a bow and arrow like the Vigilante, his ranged weapon is a literal cannon. But get this, also every character can load out with one of 4 spells. Maybe you want to have a melee weapon but a ranged spell in order to deal damage to enemies that are far away. Or keep it all melee and turn your spell into a dashing strike so you can reposition better when things get messy. Mixing and matching your loadout allows you to define your playstyle before you even start your run. And doing this with 4 players is a concept that excites me so thoroughly, I think I'm about to wake up. In your runs, alongside the usual array of unique enemy types, hard bosses, and challenges throughout, you'll also be getting perks offered to you by one of the many gods. Like always, I think it's best to explain the runs themselves by simply showing you and describing the process. Also, I'm obviously not going to explain all 16 weapons and spells. That would take us like 10 hours. Instead, I'm going to primarily focus on my experience with 3 of the characters. Firstly, we'll talk about the starter character, the Vigilante. He's actually the character you first unlock, so my gameplay in this section is genuinely quite bad. Our run starts with me getting a feel for the controls, which are pretty standard. You have your basic attack, your heavy attack, your spell button, and, if available, your ultimate move. We clear the first room and get a perk from Gog Magog. This god just gives you stagger, which stuns enemies when you stack it enough. I choose to put it on my spell because personally, stagger has never been my favorite, so I want to save my main buttons for something cooler. I step on a trap like a buffoon, clear the next room, and get the Fury God, which gives you bonus damage on Fury attacks per stack. It sounds complicated because it kind of is, but basically, if you use a Fury move on an opponent, your Fury moves will deal more damage. It doesn't seem good at first, but you'll see. Trust me on this one. Then we find our first weapon upgrade. These just enhance your basic attacks and are all pretty overpowered. This one, for example, gives me a stacking bonus damage on my spell attack forever. And if stacking exists, I'll always say yes. It's just in my blood. We get to our first half boss and Oh, I'm getting hit. Ooh. Oh, I'm playing it so dumb. Maybe I played like a coward for a bit. I'm getting the timing down of everything, which is the hardest thing about starting a new roguelike, right? Ooh, I'm almost dead. Got him. Ooh. Oh, that was so hard, man. After a beast's thrashing, we survive with almost the lowest amount of health possible, enter the next room, step on another trap, and then die. This was literally my first run ever. But even then, it was genuinely quite difficult. For my next run, I opt to play the Vigilante again with a bow and arrow instead. I'm a firm believer that ranged characters are kind of broken in roguelikes because you could position a lot sloppier while getting your damage off. I immediately get a perk from the crit god, which allows my heavy attack to crit. Since my heavy attack with this weapon is a rain of arrows that hits multiple times, it's pretty powerful. We get to the mid-boss, and with my previous experience, I now know all of his moves. But hilariously enough, it's just a different guy this time. Still, I'm ranged now, so I play very patiently and keep my distance. I managed to clutch this one out with more than 2 health, which is a marked improvement, if I do say so myself. Then we find another crit god perk, which shoots out a golden attack every time I crit. And since the heavy attack hits multiple times, this synergy is about to go bananas. We continue through our run, basically getting health upgrades whenever we can. And I'm sure these monsters feel stupid for not bringing their umbrellas, because it's raining out, baby. We hit our first major boss, Gawain the Butcher, and he is just a menace. He has a leap strike, a spin attack that follows you, an enemy summon, an earthquake attack, another earthquake attack that follows you, and when he's low enough, this bastard makes it rain too. Brother, that is my entire thing. He eventually clutches it out and kills me by stealing my whole flow. And with that comes the end of our Vigilante runs. Though we didn't get that far, it's pretty cool that one character alone can have such a different playstyle. And I only showed half of his available weapons and spells. The next character I want to talk about is the Rook, who I thought I would love, but I really couldn't get behind his movement. He's basically a very slow but very powerful character. All of his attacks take a long time, but in return, his damage output can be genuinely insane. Our first perk is a tiny stone golem that attacks enemies, which I think is cute as hell. Lil bro just wants to help out. I also get a perk that makes my dash emit an earthquake and deal stagger when I use it. The most fun thing about the Rook is the charge spell, which allows you to just smash into enemies and shove them where you want to. Makes me feel like a high school bully. Now, I want to talk about some game tech that I realized in our Vigilante runs, which genuinely changes everything. Remember how I said that multi-hit moves apply on-hit effects multiple times? Well, I make my big spin move apply poison, which means that every time my spin hits an enemy, it applies yet another stack of poison. Theoretically, if I could just find a way to spin faster, I'd be able to stack a ton of poison on an enemy. But unfortunately, I don't. I just can't play heavy weapons in roguelikes. It's too hard for me. My brain doesn't wrap around it. So yet again, we die to Gawain the Butcher. I decide to try out the Rook's hand cannon, and it's actually so funny. It's a bow and arrow, but significantly slower with a much larger splash damage. Understanding that I'm just trying to do big damage, I opt to get crits on my basic attack to hopefully blow someone's torso off their body. Then I find a weapon upgrade that makes me shoot 3 cannonballs instead of 1, which sounds kind of ridiculous. We get to our first mid-boss and just look at this health bar. Sure, it's crit, so I'm basically relying on RNG, but whenever I land 2 or 3 crits in the same shot, I could literally hear the bosses rethinking their life choices. We get back to Gawain, and even though I'm moving slower than a dial-up connection, my damage is just too high, and I have range, so I manage to slay Gawain and head to the next stage. The second stage is a lot bigger than the first, and enemies are also a lot faster, so having to aim my cannon is actually quite difficult. If that's not hard enough, The mid-boss is a dashing rat assassin that also throws bouncing blades that zone you and summons enemies. Fortunately, my triple shot of the cannon is able to clear the summons as long as I position correctly. And I do 400 damage on a single attack, which is probably the highest amount of damage I've done ever. With the mid-boss defeated, I was feeling a little confident, but realistically, I was still just too slow and ended up dying in the next room. And with that death, I realized that I'm not a Rook main either. So now, let me tell you about our third character. My favorite character in this game by far, who has some absolutely insane synergies. The Spectre. The Spectre's main weapon is a ranged magic missile machine gun, in which every attack shoots multiple missiles. Why is that so important? Because multi-hit moves apply on-hit effects multiple times. Meaning, when I got the poison buff on my basic attack, every single one of my attacks was applying a ton of poison on enemies, up to a set amount of stacks. And this is absolutely hilarious. Basically, my entire playstyle was poisoning opponents with 1 or 2 sets of magic missiles, and then running away while they perished. This is basically how poisoning someone works in real life. It's so strong, like genuinely so powerful. Even fighting bosses like Gawain were pretty simple because I just had to poison them and keep my distance. In stage 2, we do more of the same and get to the mid-boss. But instead of it being the dashing rat guy, it's 2 giant super rats that fight you at the same time and summon enemies. It's pretty hard, and it also makes me realize that my build isn't as powerful as I thought. This fight takes a very long time because the poison stack caps out pretty quickly, and the poison doesn't tick that fast. We get to the second major boss, Sir Percival, who's a funny little jester guy who dashes a ton, spawns charging soldiers, and leaves an anti-dash zone on the floor. But again, this build is incredibly safe, so I survived pretty healthily because I just hide the entire time and let him die of age. The next stage is like a pier over water. We find a weapon upgrade that makes my attack shoot twice as many projectiles but in a spread, which sounds like it would be good for my current build. I had to be closer due to the spread, but I could almost fully stack my poison in 1 or 2 attacks. The mid-boss here is an annoying little laser turret who's incredibly tedious and also takes forever to kill because it's hard to hit him with my new spread attack. We kill the Beyblade of Death, blitz through the rest of the stage, and then fight our third major boss, Lady Bedivere, who summons a bunch of enemies, shoots you with water turrets, and also zones you with sea creatures. She's actually pretty hard and almost kills me. At this point, I could say that the poison wasn't as strong as I thought it was gonna be, which is a shame. We get to the fourth and final stage of our run, Camelot, where you have to walk into the round table and fight a bunch of knights. This fight is actually so cool because you never leave the room to go somewhere else. You just keep spawning more enemies. Unfortunately though, these are really tough guys, and even though I do my best, I end up being brutally killed on what may have been the final section of the game. I rack my brain to think about what I could have done better, and then I remember the Fury God, who allows you to deal bonus damage on Fury attacks by stacking Fury. And he has a perk where if you stack Fury on somebody who's at max stacks, it deals Chain Lightning instead. Since my basic attack hits 1,000,000 times as the Spectre, technically speaking, I should be able to stack Fury fast and do a ton of extra damage. I put it to the test, and it is way better than the poison build. And the Chain Lightning gives me a form of wave clear as well. We get all the way back to the round table, actually defeat the knights this time around, and progress to the actual last stage of the game. And here we fight King Arthur. This guy does it all. Laser beams, raining hellfire, dashing strikes, fire blasts, sword waves, earthquakes. I burned through all 18,000 of his health, and you know what this bastard does? He has a second phase. I'd show you raw gameplay for this part, but I don't talk the entire time because I'm so focused. Also, something you may notice in this footage, I actually use my ultimate move on this run, where I turn into a poison god for a few seconds. I use the invulnerability to save me sometimes, but the damage isn't really there, so it's more so for my survivability. And as we reach the end of our second phase, with both of us mere seconds away from death, I unfortunately die literal seconds before he would die due to my poison. It's genuinely such a heartbreaking end to the story. And hilariously enough, after I die, I literally see him die as well, which makes me feel even worse. I cannot wait for this game to be fully released so that I can come back with my friends and rip King Arthur's head right out of his ass. Sworn is fantastic. I had so much fun playing this game and I am salivating at the release date. The game comes out February 6th, so be sure to give it a try if you like action roguelikes. If you click the link in my description, you could actually download a demo and try this game out right now. It's good, I promise. Go give it a shot. I'm sure you'll like it. Thank you so much, Sworn, for sponsoring the video. You guys are awesome, and I'm so glad I got to show it off to my gang. I hope you all enjoyed the content, and I'll see you in the next one.